title of my sermon today is Leave the Future to God. Live by faith. Should all turn to Matthew, the book of Matthew in the New Testament, and go back into the Old Testament to the fifth book. You'll come to the book of Habakkuk. I can't think of anything more relevant for God's people in today's world. Does God allow bad things to happen? Why does God allow bad things to happen? If we don't know why, life can be very distressing. Habakkuk's book is meant to be comforting. The name Habakkuk means to hug or to embrace in a comforting way. And as often the case, his name has something to do with the message of the book. As we glance at the book, we will see the questions that Habakkuk wrestled with are the same questions you and I wrestle with today. I think you'll be amazed that his situation is much like the one we live in. Judah had become an Assyrian vassal state, filled with corruption and violence. Many of God's people were turning to the Assyrian gods, and the land was becoming more and more wicked and evil. Habakkuk was in distress about this, and if we look at chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, we can see what his complaint is here. How long, Lord, must I cry out for help? But you won't listen. I'm crying out to you, oppression, but you aren't providing deliverance. Why are you forcing me to look at iniquity and to stare at wickedness? Social havoc and oppression all around me. There are legal conflicts and disputes which abound. Therefore, the law has become paralyzed and justice never comes about, because the criminals outnumber the righteous. Wherever the judgments are made, they come out crooked. Sound much like what's going on in today's world? Have you ever cried out to God for an answer? Where are you, God? Why are you allowing this? Here is one of God's own prophets asking, why aren't you doing something about this? Those who have faith in God know He's aware of everything that's going on. Lack of understanding seems to be the case with Habakkuk. He needed answers. Habakkuk wasn't seeing what God was doing, so God answers him directly. Chapter 1, verses 5 through 11. Look around at the nations, see, wonder, be astonished, for I'm doing a work in your days that you won't believe. Even when I tell you, I'm raising the Chaldeans, and they're going to destroy Jerusalem, and you and your people are going to be carried off to Babylon. Like God said, Habakkuk couldn't believe it. God's answer is, I've answered you. However, your answer has been different from the one you expected. You don't understand. Habakkuk's not a faithless man, but difference between what he expected and what God was about to do was affecting his faith, his understanding. Habakkuk was perplexed. His issues have gone from bad to worse. God has answered him. That's good. But God's answer brings up an even bigger issue. God's raising up the Chaldeans, and they're going to wipe Judah off the map. Knowing this and knowing God, he finally realizes God has a different plan. Habakkuk must change his way of thinking. Habakkuk knew that God's ways are not always our ways. He again cried out to God, telling him exactly what was on his mind. Let's read verses 12 and 13. And let's notice his honesty. He gets his mind off of his situation and on to the Lord. He reminds himself who the Lord is in verses 12 and 13. Haven't you existed forever? He reminds himself. God knows the end from the beginning. Lord, you're my God, my Holy One. You're my rock. He's saying, I can stand on your word. No one else's. We won't die. He remembers the promise that God had to God's people. Lord, you're preparing them for judgment. He sees that God is raising the Chaldeans to correct Israel, while at the same time preparing the Chaldeans for their own demise. Yet, the prophet's having trouble reconciling this. He questions God a second time. Your eyes are too pure to gaze upon evil, and you cannot look and tolerate wickedness. So why can you tolerate these treacherous people? And why do you stay silent while the wicked devour those who are more righteous than they? Wait a minute. More righteous? Well, that kind of thinking has been around since Eve blamed the serpent for the sin. There we see it. Why Habakkuk isn't getting it. Habakkuk's been complaining about the evil deeds of his own people. God hates any kind of unrighteousness, especially if it's from his own people. Yet, Habakkuk still thinks they're more righteous than those evil Chaldeans. Habakkuk goes to the end of the chapter telling God just how evil they are, as if God didn't already know. Then in chapter 2:1, the last line of Habakkuk's second question, we can see a change in Habakkuk's thinking. He now accepts the fact that he cannot always understand what God is doing. I don't understand why you should allow these people to wipe us out. So I'm going to station myself on this tower here, like a sentry watching, and wait and listen to see how you answer me. Notice the funny little comment at the end of the verse. And when you answer me, I'll try to think of something to say when I still don't get it. He's now realizing there's nothing he can do to change the situation. Judah's going to be wiped out. Habakkuk knows the scripture. He loves God, and he knows that God has a plan for his people. He just can't figure it out. So he waits for an answer. And the answer comes. Chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. When he answered, the Lord told me, write out the revelation, engraven it clearly on tablets, so that the courier may run with it. For the revelation pertains to an appointed time. It speaks truthfully about the end. Though it delays, wait for it. It will surely come about. It will not be late. Notice their arrogance. They have no inward uprightness. But the righteous shall live by faith. The righteous shall live by faith. These words are the main point of Habakkuk's book. The righteous will live by faith. This is where the rubber meets the road, brethren. This verse is so meaningful. It's quoted several times by Paul in the New Testament, even Jesus himself. This is where we struggle. How do we have faith? This is what Habakkuk was dealing with. It's easy to let our emotions take over. Have you ever yelled at your radio or TV? It's easy to have faith when we know what God is doing. Not so easy to have faith when we don't know what God is doing. In chapters 1, we see Habakkuk struggling. His faith is weak. As he becomes less worried about what's going on in the world around him, the more confident that he has in God working things out as his faith grows. By the time we get to chapter 3, he's putting his complete trust in what God is doing. His focus is no longer on what he can't understand. His focus is now on trusting in the Lord. Lord, I don't understand all that is happening, but I know this. You are my all in all. You have existed forever. I haven't. You see the end from the beginning. I don't. You are able. I am not. You know what's best. I do not. Only God knows what is best. We don't. We can't know all the details. What God is doing. God is in charge. In everything, he is to be glorified. It's not about us. This is what faith is. Habakkuk's faith has changed. His complete attitude has been turned around in chapter 3. Habakkuk now is joyful. Habakkuk must have been a director of music in his place of worship, as we notice in verse 1 and verse 19. All of chapter 3 is in the form of a psalm, showing a man of peace. He's rejoicing and singing. He's reminding himself of God's greatness, his power, and his love. Verse 17 through 19 is a reminder that all God's people, that God is our strength, and God is our salvation. Verse 2, I heard your answer. Okay, bring it on. I'm scared. You're going to do your work, but in your wrath, remember mercy. In verse 3 through 16, Habakkuk's psalm records the work the Lord has done through history of Israel. He remembers God's faithfulness, love, and mercy and power. He again admits the fear of what's coming in verse 16. In verses 17 through 19, he gets back to praising God. No longer we see a man complaining about what God is doing or not doing. Habakkuk is rejoicing. He has faith in spite of what he don't understand. He can't make out all the details, but he knows God knows best. He knows God is loving, in control, and able to accomplish his purpose. When we struggle with our faith like Habakkuk, we need to remember to keep our eyes focused on the Father and the Son. We may not have all the answers, but we know we can go to God with our questions and our fears. God's people shouldn't be looking to the world for their answers. God has opened the Bible for you and me. As we near the end time, things are going to get more troubling. What's ahead is not for the faint-hearted. Keep the faith, rejoice in the fact that God is doing his work. Habakkuk chapter 3, 18 and 19. As for me, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will find my joy in God, who delivers me. The Lord is my strength. He will make my feet like those of a deer, equipping me to tread on high places. The question is that, do we trust God like this? Do we trust God like this? Do we trust him even when we don't understand? Do we lean on him? Whenever we act in faith, we glorify the Lord, and the Father is pleased. Let's remember Habakkuk's advice. Leave the future to God. Live by faith.